That don't happen. I can't get caught in the rain. That happened. I gotta go inside. I just can't do it, man. All right. Now we go back. Okay. Now we're ready. Okay. I think I got it right this time. This is Sports for Real. And I am trying to get this broadcast off. I started off talking about the hurricane. As you know, Hurricane Milton is barreling over the western edge of Florida, right outside Tampa. And it's supposed to make landfall tonight. And like I said before, a lot of people have been scurrying from that area, scurrying from South Florida, coming up north. And most people are going up into Georgias and Carolinas trying to escape the storm. Well, as you know, when you go to running like that, everybody's running too. You're not the only one. And you end up into a traffic situation where it don't move a whole lot. And a lot of people end up getting in accidents because they're running away from something that could happen, but they're in a situation where they're making things happen. And that's not always a good thing, especially when you're panicking. And that's what I think a lot of people are doing. But just going to talk today a little bit about what's been going on in the sports world over the last couple of days. And I'm going to share my screen. And then I am going to bounce around a little bit until I get this right. And I'm going to start off talking about today, Dan Orlovsky. Mr. Orlovsky is a analyst of sorts with ESPN, and he gives his take on weekly events, weekly occurrences in the NFL and other sports. If you're not familiar with Orlovsky, that's him on the left. He used to be a quarterback. He played for several teams over like 12 years. What you call a journeyman quarterback, but he's well enough to make it to the league and survive for a while, so he's not hurting at all. And even if you may call a guy like this a bust, is he really a bust? Because if you remember, the object of all of this entertainment and sports is to take care of your family. And he's made well enough money to do that from his ventures with the NFL and now with ESPN. But the problem he has right now is that on Monday, he got into it with Shannon Sharp. And the reason being, Orlovsky is not the type to really criticize certain players when they don't play well. Now, other players, he'll criticize certain quarterbacks, but the elite ones or the supreme ones, like an Aaron Rodgers, he's going to take a less notable stance on it. And because of that, guys like Shannon Sharp have now begun calling him out. Why is it necessary to call him out about Aaron Rodgers? Well, Aaron Rodgers had 3 interceptions over in London the other day. He hasn't been playing that great so far this year. And up to this point, previous years, Orlovsky has been blaming the Jets' troubles on a poor offense, poor offensive design, et cetera, et cetera. But he hasn't criticized the play of Rodgers. Now, he got a pass last year when Rodgers got hurt, so you couldn't blame the quarterbacks on the poor performance of the Jets. But at the same time, you can still blame the other guys besides Rodgers. Well, everybody's pretty much back this year, including Rodgers, and Rodgers hasn't quite lived up to the bill. So their offense is still not playing that great. And Orlovsky, he won't call Rodgers out about it. So Shannon Sharp, ever the outspoken one, if you recall when he was playing, he kind of threw his quarterback, Elvis Gerback, under the bus for not being the player everybody said he was supposed to be. He kind of, threw the man out there and put him on the spot. He's good for calling you out. He will call you out if you don't think you're doing what you're supposed to do. And as part of the analyst's job, Orlovsky is supposed to come on out and say what he thinks, whether it's popular or not. Well, Orlovsky, he comes back and he says, well, why should he rain down negative comments or try to torture a guy just because it's popular? And Sharp says, well, your job description pretty much says you're supposed to be critical and blunt on whoever it is, not just certain people. And Orlovsky, he's being called out because he's not doing that. So now the clock is ticking on Orlovsky. just like Elvis Grbac. You didn't hear much about Grbac anymore. He didn't play very much after Sharp threw him under the bus. Now he's throwing Orlovsky under the bus, and people are jumping on that storyline. And it's easy to see when you follow a guy how they really feel about certain people. Now, as far as Rodgers goes, I saw some of that game when they played the Vikings, especially at the end. Right before he threw that third interception, they needed to score a touchdown. He had a guy run a route, and the guy put a double move on him. It wasn't expected, but he popped wide open. Rodgers saw him. Now, in years past, Rodgers have hit those passes, but this particular time he overthrew the guy. And shortly thereafter, he threw that third interception to seal the game. So Rodgers is just as much as fault for the rest of the offense, and it's clear to everyone except Orlovsky that he needs to be called out about it. But having said that, Rodgers, ever the prickly one, is also embroiled in more controversy with the Jets because the head coach there, Robert Saleh on the right, they fired him yesterday. Word has it that Saleh was fired because he was going to demote the offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, and reassign him. Once word got back to the owners within 5 minutes of what was going to take place, that's when the announcement came that Saleh was going to be fired. And of course, people are going to say that Aaron Rodgers has something to do with that because Hackett is his man. Now, if you recall Hackett 2 years ago, he was the head coach of the Denver Broncos, and they had an awful season. He came last year to be the offensive coordinator for the Jets, and they didn't do so great. But he did manage to eke out a win over the Broncos, and that was a great win for them because if you recall, Sean Payton came in and said what an awful job that Hackett had done the year before. He kind of threw the man under the bus. But the Jets got back a little bit of revenge from that by beating the Broncos. Well, 2 weeks ago, the Broncos edged them out 10-9. So on it goes with the finger pointing and name blaming thing. But the point is, Saleh has been fired, and it said that because Hackett was the primary reason why Rodgers was going to the Jets, they're saying that he defended Hackett so that they would rather have Hackett on staff than Saleh. He's got more power than the head coach. And because of that, Saleh was fired. But me, just like his dad, Paul Hackett, I haven't seen anything great about any of the Hacketts. So the fact that he's being demoted doesn't surprise me at all. And the question is, will the guy that's taking over for Saleh demote Hackett as well? Well, that is the question. But I know one thing. Now that the head coach is gone, it's some scrambling around about what's going to happen for the future. Now, keep in mind, the Jets got a pretty good defense. So all they need is a little bit of help from the offense, and they would be a whole lot better than what they're doing. It's still, 2-3? They're right in the race. So you have to know that there's some kind of internal conflict going on between Rodgers and Saleh. And I'm thinking, had Rodgers been able to play all of last year, Saleh would have probably got fired last year. So the question is, what's going to happen next with the Jets? I think Hackett's going to get demoted, and they're going to get somebody else in there to call some plays. And eventually the Jets going to turn around and start playing a little bit better football. And Rodgers kind of hinted at that when he gave his press conference the other day in London. He's saying it doesn't matter because if they take 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they're going to somehow turn this around and make a run of it. When it's going to happen, he didn't know. But I think he was alluding to the fact that he knew something was up, that Saleh was inches away from being out the door. So now that Saleh is gone, what excuses are you going to make next? So these are kind of things that's been swirling around Rodgers for a while. And of course, he denies everything. But it's interesting to me the fact that this situation with Saleh occurs immediately after Orlovsky gets into it with Sharp about Aaron Rodgers not being called to the carpet. And if the Jets did fire Saleh to appease Rodgers, is showing you a pattern that everybody wants to make Rodgers look good, even when he's not holding up his end of the bargain. So something has to shake, or this thing with the Jets is just not going to work out. The locker room is going to pretty much fall apart. All right. On to the regular season Ravens. I told you that the Ravens made a great acquisition when they picked up Derrick Henry. He's the type of player that they need, banging it between the tackles, and he's also a home run hitter. You've seen that a couple times this year already. He almost closed the game out with the Bengals in overtime with a home run hit, and he came back and won that game 41-38. The Ravens are going to have a good season because, like I said before, and I'm not going to get into it now, teams play them a certain way in the regular season, and it changes up when they get to the playoffs. This is why I call them the regular season Ravens, because they're going to do well. But in the playoffs, it's going to be a different situation. But in this particular instance here, the reporter there, you can see the hand there, was interviewing Lamar Jackson. Henry came up to, he wasn't going to try to take over the interview. He was coming to congratulate Lamar Jackson. But the reporter, once they saw Henry, they kind of like fired Lamar Jackson, and the conversation turned strictly to Henry because, he made the big play to win the game. So the spotlight is shifting over to Henry. Nobody said anything, but you can kind of tell that I don't think Jackson liked that too much. Yes, he won the game, but that was kind of rude the way that went down. I don't think Henry was trying to be rude or anything or overshine his teammate, but that don't look too well. And I hope this is not the case, but that could be the budding of a split in the locker room, because if Jackson used to getting all the attention and now you got a player like Henry as a star, he starts getting all the attention, then you're going to start to see the truth about what these players are really all about. But the problem I got with what Henry did is not that he came and bogarted the interview. It's what he said when he did that. He was giving Jackson praise all along, and he came out and called him a GOAT. He said, "This is the GOAT." People get carried away when they have emotional moments. So you can kind of take that with a grain of salt. But some people actually believe that this guy is the GOAT. The GOAT is a complete player who can put the ball in there when they have to have it. Yes, he stiff-armed the guy, and he made the throw, and the dude made a high catch in the middle. He threw it where it had to be thrown. That was a good throw. Wobbly as hell, but they survived it. You can't expect to get away with that all the time, but that particular play, they got away with that. So the excitement is there for, to give Jackson his credit because he did make the play on 2 or 3 different ends on that. But to call this guy a GOAT, I think he might want to retract that. But like I said, the regular season Ravens, they won 3 straight games now. They're 3-2. Everybody's all excited about them. But the reality is there's that coordinator in the background. He's watching. He's seeing what he can do. He's putting together a game plan. So if I run across these Ravens in the playoffs, we're going to have something for them. So get your wins now. But if the Ravens were slick, they will learn from the past, and they should be piecing their playoff game plan together. And this is what we're going to do to counteract that wily old defensive coordinator that's been waiting on you since week 1. But Henry, great run. The kid's crossed over 10,000 yards. He's in conversation with the greatest based on what he's done on all 3 levels up to this point. He's in the conversation possibly for being one of the greatest all-time backs there are. I can't never say who's the best because styles is like boxing, makes fights. And it makes running backs as well. But he's doing great. But he got a little carried away when he started calling Lamar Jackson the GOAT. Congratulations on the win, but come on, man, let's get serious. All right. And finally, this was an ad that I saw in Indianapolis about will the curse continue? What curse are they talking about? Well, the Colts hadn't won in Jacksonville before this game since 2014, which made 9 straight losses. So they coming in against a Jacksonville team that hadn't won a game all year. Best chance to get one, right? Well, not so fast. When they came here, Jacksonville kind of knew that they can beat the Colts, just like they knew they can beat the Texans. It's just a matter of whether they're going to commit suicide and beat themselves again. They almost did. They had a 2-touchdown lead with about 3 minutes left in the game and ended up having to kick a field goal with less than 20 seconds to go to win the game. But the point here Now that the Colts have lost 10 straight, the question is, will the curse continue? And the curse that's being referred to is, in my opinion, not the 9 straight losses, but it goes all the way back to 1979. If you look at this picture right here, the guy with his hand up is Robert Irsay, who is the owner of the Colts. At this time in 1979, when this picture was taken, he came to Jacksonville to discuss possibly moving the Colts down to Jacksonville with the mayor, Jake Godbold. Well, the problem that Irsay had was Baltimore didn't want to build a new stadium. They were planning Memorial Stadium, which was falling down around his ears. So he was using Jacksonville as leverage to possibly get a new stadium out of Baltimore. He never really intended to move the team. He was just using Jacksonville as leverage. And as Godbold would later say, he knew that Irsay wasn't coming when he put his arm around his neck to say, we got to tear this stadium down, right? And that's when Godbold said he knew that the Colts wouldn't come because they didn't have the money to build it. But what's known as Colts fever here, if you look in the background here, 50,000 people showed up to the stadium to greet Irsay as he dropped in on his helicopter as they tried to woo the Colts to come to Jacksonville. In the end, he didn't leave Baltimore, and the fans were left without a team. But what it did do was put the Jacksonville market on the radar of the NFL. And in 1993, they were awarded a franchise to the NFL. The Colts, on the other hand, they stayed in Baltimore 4 or 5 more seasons, and they ended up moving by cover of night to Indianapolis for the 1984 season. So while he was dangling Jacksonville, he was also looking around at other places, and Indianapolis just happened to be in a place that they can provide better playing arrangement than, say, Jacksonville could, because they had that Hoosier Dome there. Now, Memorial Stadium, when the Ravens or the Browns moved to Baltimore and changed their name to the Ravens, they played in Memorial Stadium for a couple of years while the new stadium they're in now was being built. So a lot of tie-ins going on here. But the curse to me is when he used these people to try to get a new stadium when he knew full well that he wasn't coming. And because of that, every time the Colts come here, from now on, they're going to have problems. And it's been that way ever since they've been coming to Jacksonville. I'm not certain what their all-time record is in Jacksonville, but it's not too great, especially if you lost 10 straight. And as far as curses go, I think they also have the curse of Baltimore, because if the Colts, in my mind, are ever going to get to the Super Bowl, they're going to have to go through Baltimore to do it. They did that in Super Bowl 41. They eked out like a 15-12 or 18-15 lead. Very, very tight ball game, and everything had to go their way. Otherwise, they would not have won Super Bowl 41. They would have got there. So I think they're going to have to go through Baltimore to get to any Super Bowls. And when they come to Jacksonville, they're always going to have problems. Whether you believe in that or not, I don't know, but it's just something I've been thinking about for years. And now that they won 10 straight here in Jacksonville over the Colts, you can't help but think something like that is at play here. So just something to think about. So again, just to recap what I talked about, Orlovsky, he went head-to-head with Shannon Sharpe, and Sharpe was very animated as he ripped Orlovsky apart about, his light treatment of Aaron Rodgers and other players in the league while he rips apart other players. Sharpe had him dead to rights here, and he didn't really say anything to defend themselves. And if you look over to the left, Stephen A. Smith, he loves that kind of stuff because he didn't offer an opinion on it, but you just got to know that he's probably siding with Shannon Sharpe in this particular situation. And very interesting what Orlovsky is going to do now. Jets, they fired Robert Saleh behind possibly demoting Nathaniel Hackett from offensive coordinator and bringing up the receiver coach to be the new OC. And because of that, the Woody Johnson, he didn't like that too much, so he canned Saleh. So that leaves Aaron Rodgers with his buddy Nathaniel Hackett and his poor performance as an offensive coordinator and head coach to stick around a while. But it's going to cause more turmoil because the players in the locker room, you know how they are with those inside loyalties, and they're going to start pointing fingers internally before it erupts into a full-scale locker room implosion. But what's going to happen in the end? Nathaniel Hackett, he's going to stay somewhere. He's going to get another job. And in the next 4 or 5 years, he's going to resurface as a head coach somewhere because, again, his dad was a head coach and he's been around the league and he's got connections and so on and so on and so on. That's just the way the league tends to work. The Ravens, playing good football, running the football, and as long as they can run the football, then that opens the door for Lamar Jackson to run around and make plays without having to be forced to throw the ball and win the game with his arm. As long as Henry is doing well, the Ravens are going to do well, but the things are going to get tightened up real quick when it's get to the playoffs. But they have won 3 in a row, so you have to give them their credit. But he called Lamar Jackson the greatest of all time. I know it's in the heat of battle and emotion, but he's got to know better than that. That's the only thing. That's the only time I ever heard him say anything. He don't seem to talk a whole lot, but when he does talk, he don't say something silly like that. And so I was kind of surprised he had that to say. And then the curse in Jacksonville, they did lose the 10th straight game. And like I say, the curse, in my opinion, is when Robert Irsay dangled the Colts over Jacksonville, making them think he was going to move that team here when he had no intentions all along. I really don't think he had intentions of going to Indianapolis, but when they didn't build him a stadium and they looked at him like, what you going to do? He moved his team and let them know. Now, a lot of people in Baltimore hated Irsay behind that, but as was told to me 20 years ago, people in Baltimore, they don't even mention the Colts anymore. It's almost like they were never there. And at this point, they've been in Indianapolis a little longer now than they were in Baltimore. And if you know anything about the Colts' history, the Baltimore Colts started play in 1953, but they were the original Dallas Texans of 1952. That team was one of the worst teams in NFL history, but they did manage to win 1 game, and they got by the Bears. And Hollis, that's the one greatest regret that he ever had, is that he lost to the 1952 Dallas Texans. So they left Dallas, and they took the franchise to Baltimore, and they became the Colts. And then they stayed there for about 30 years, 31 years. Then they started playing Indianapolis. So they've been in Indianapolis now 40 years. So now you can say that the Colts are more Indy than Baltimore ever was, but there's still some Baltimore fans. There are some old geezers. So take it for what it's worth. But as far as Irsay goes, I don't know much about his dad. But I will say his son, Jim, I found out when he goes to out-of-town games, he'll go up to somebody that's working hard and unassuming, just going about doing what they're supposed to do, reach into his pocket and pull out 15, 20,000 and give it to him. I like that. If I ever get to the point where I got some big money like Irsay, I'll be doing the same thing. But just the fact you find something out like that, people not looking for nothing, and you go and give it to them just because they're working hard and trying to make it in this world. That was a great gesture, and he does that, from my understanding, every time he goes to a away game. This is the kind of things he do. So I had to give him great credit for that. Great shout out. Give him his flowers for all of that, and I think that's great. And I know he was sick a couple of years ago. I think people say they didn't think he was going to make it, but because of gestures like that is part of the reason why he survived that health ordeal he was going through, because he gave back to people who weren't expecting it. So that's a great thing. But other stories about Irsay, I don't want to get into too much because I can use it for another broadcast. But if you didn't know, Irsay used to be the owner of the LA Rams. The Colts were owned by Carroll Rosenblum. And based on advantageous reasons for both of them, they found a way to swap franchises. So that's how Carroll Rosenblum became the Rams, and Irsay took over the Colts. And it's one of the origins of how the Rams came to become the St. Louis Rams. More on that at another time. But until then, something else comes up. I find some more information out about Robert Saleh, Orlovsky, if he does something to make himself in a better light. I get wind of that, I'll let you know. But until then, this has been Sports for Real. I'm out.